In 2022, 67 journalists lost their lives that year covering conflicts around the globe.
These guys are up here trying to pick off these ISIS fighters. The sound of US jets is constantly overhead, and that has been a decisive factor in pushing them back.
It's with a deep sense of gratitude that Benjamin Hall, a war correspondent for the Fox News channel, wasn't one of them.
This is clearly coming towards us. That's where all the gun battles have been as well. It's not going to be safe, I think, for us to go any further.
Gravely injured, he barely survived a bombing attack in Ukraine on March 14, 2022. As a longtime war correspondent covering conflicts around the world, he knows firsthand the risks journalists take to report the important stories. Suffering debilitating injuries from the Ukraine bombing, Benjamin told the miraculous story of his survival in his best-selling book, Saved, published in 2023. One reviewer called it a bracing tale of life on the edge of death. Now his new book, titled Resolute, picks up where Saved left off. In it, he shares his deeply personal stories of the most profound lessons he learned about the power of resilience and survival. Benjamin Hall joins us today to share some of those inspirational stories from Fox News headquarters in New York. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much, David.
Well, Ben, you're a longtime war correspondent who's covered very dangerous conflicts around the world. How do you describe what it takes to do that job and to survive?
Well, I think, first of all, when you decide to become a war correspondent, you have to realize and know why you're doing it. For me, it was a couple of issues. First of all, and look, I'll be very honest, first of all, when I was younger, I wanted to go and see the world. I was fascinated in different cultures, and I really began to be fascinated in conflict as well. My father was born in the Philippines. He was raised during World War II. He was in a Japanese prison camp till the ages of 12, and he was rescued by American soldiers during the Battle of Manila, and that led him to the US. And so my whole life, I was fascinated in conflict resolution. And as soon as I graduated from college, I wanted to learn more and I wanted to experience it. And so, first of all, I had the interest in conflict itself. And then after that, I had real interest in journalism. I just think that people's stories are fascinating. And I think that we must always be looking at other people's stories so we can understand our own lives better. So we can't take anything at home for granted. And so all of these things came together. And it wasn't until I was first on a front line that I was really put to the test, and I had to decide if that's something I wanted to do. And it was actually in Libya the very first time. And I remember during the Civil War, we had gotten onto a small little boat. We had broken through a siege. We were on a fishing boat packed full of illegal weapons, and we got into Misrata, and the bombs were falling, and there was a lot of injuries, deaths. And I spoke to myself at that point, and I said, "You've seen what it's like right now. Do you love it enough? Is it important enough for you to want to continue telling these stories from conflict?" And I decided that it was, and it's been a part of my life for the last 15 plus years. And it's something that it's tough because I was going to say something I've enjoyed, but you can't enjoy war, but you can get a great lot of satisfaction from the work you are doing. Then 15 years later, I finally was the one who was injured myself in war.
And I imagine part of that satisfaction is knowing that you're informing the millions or even billions of people who can't or won't possibly be exposed to the conflict itself, but they need to know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you what's fascinating with conflict as well is that it works on so many levels. At the very base, you have the people caught up in it. You have the people whose homes have been lost, whose families have been destroyed. But then, and those are the stories you have to start off telling. But above that, many of the war zones I've been to, you have tribal issues, then you have financial issues, then you have geopolitics, then you have global weapons sales, then you have big superpowers playing, in competition as well. All of these factors come together in every conflict, in most conflicts. And so you have to tell the story from the very bottom, from the people who are caught up in it, but you also have to tell the stories of world leaders who are involved as well. And, conflict has all of these things together. And I just find that to be absolutely fascinating, balancing that as a journalist to try and understand it. And if you speak to the people who are caught up in conflict, it doesn't matter to them what's happening in DC or in Moscow or in China, but that is a part of what's happening to them. It's so interconnected, and that's one of the difficulties and also one of the things that most intrigues me about conflict.
Well, we're here to talk about your second book, Resolute. However, I'd like to briefly touch on your first book, the bestseller Saved. In that latter book, you describe the bombing attack you suffered through. And please remind our audience about what occurred in Ukraine nearly 3 years ago to the day of our recording this interview. What were the circumstances of the attack that nearly killed you, and what was the extent of your injuries?
Yeah, it was March 14th, 2022, and we were covering the conflict in Ukraine. It was me and my team. We were in Kyiv. The Russians had almost surrounded the capital city. It was those early days of the conflict when they had come straight down from Belarus. And me, my cameraman, Pierre Zakchevsky, our local fixer, Sasha, and two Ukrainians were with us. And we were out in this little town called Horenka that had been totally demolished by Russian bombardment, but was abandoned. And we went out and we filmed for a little bit and we recorded what had happened. And I remember as we were driving back and we'd been recording for a bit, thinking, wow, what incredible footage we've got. Like, these are scenes that our viewers haven't seen yet. This is really going to paint a picture of what's happening and the destruction. And we were working our way back towards Kyiv, hadn't seen anyone in a long time. And we came up to this abandoned checkpoint, 3 concrete barriers in a row. And the car slowed down to take the first turn. And out of the air, we heard that first shell coming in. And it's a sound, sadly, I know well, that whistle. And 30 feet in front of us, the first shell went off. Quickly, the Ukrainian trying to drive the car tried to get into reverse. The car stalled for a little bit, and a few seconds later, the second shell landed right adjacent to the car. Now, this is the one that I blacked out, and I, at that point, got shrapnel in the eye, and I was wearing body armor, so luckily some of my skull came out, but I was injured mainly from the shoulders up, I believe. But I blacked out. I was in a place of total peace and blackness, total quiet. I mean, it was almost, whether you will say it was close to another life, I don't know. But right in that moment, in that blackness, came my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, Anna, right in front of me, lifelike as anything. And I saw her in that moment. And she said to me, "Daddy, you've got to get out of the car. You've got to get out of the car." And it brought me back, and my eyes opened, and I just grabbed for the door of the car, and I got one step out of the car itself, and the third shell hit the car itself. And it threw me away. I passed out for a bit, and I woke up. I don't know, maybe, I don't know how long, 30 seconds, a minute later, perhaps, and I was on fire. My right leg was largely gone, and I roll around. I'm trying to put the flames out. And the first thing I do is I look up and I notice that Pierre, our cameraman, is ahead of me. He's maybe 15 feet ahead of me. He had gotten out of the car first, and he just said, "Don't move, Russian drones, Russian drones." We actually believe it was artillery that attacked us, but he was just saying Russian drones. And I lay still for a while, and then I was looking at my injuries and felt no pain at this point, no pain at all. Whether that is the adrenaline kicking through you and you are just on a hyper alert status. But I eventually say, "Pierre, it doesn't matter. I am so badly injured. I've got to go." He said, "Russian drones, Russian drones." I was there for 30 to 40 minutes. I lay there. I think I was in and out of consciousness. Pierre sadly died during that time. Sasha and the 2 Ukrainians died during the attack, and I was kind of unaware of this at the time. And all I remember thinking was, whatever it takes, I'm going to find a way home. It doesn't matter how injured I am. I'm going home to see my daughters and my wife, whatever it takes. And eventually, we couldn't get cell phone reception. There was no, the phones weren't working. And this one car came out of nowhere and it drove past us. And I was waving and screaming at it, and it didn't see me. So I started dragging myself along, dragging myself up to the road itself. And amazingly, this one car, they were Ukrainian special forces. They had some engine problem just a few minutes down the road. And again, another miracle. This car stopped and came back in the same direction. And at that point, I was further up and I was ready, and I had something in my hands, and I threw it at this van and this car, and they saw me. They stopped. They jumped out. I remember this Ukrainian special forces soldier who I came to know after that. His military call name was Song. And he grabbed me by my body armor and he dragged me along. He pulled me and threw me into the back of his car. But it was that very moment when he grabbed me and pulled me, that I suddenly felt all the pain. That moment where I was suddenly saved was when I suddenly was able to feel that. Um, and then began this few days of trying to evacuate me. Fox didn't know at that point where exactly I was, or they knew the team had been hit. They didn't know who was alive or who wasn't alive, but they got into an action straight away. And they got this group called Save Our Allies, which are veterans, former intel guys from the US who were just across the border in Poland to come and try and find me. They'd been helping out with the Ukrainian effort as well. And they set off in these beaten up old ambulances they'd just bought, and they drove right up to the front lines trying to find me. And honestly, these guys, they absolutely saved my life. Um, I was being treated in this small little hospital by the Ukrainian military. And the Ukrainian doctor at the time, he was treating me. He'd taken off my leg. He'd managed to sort of sew up my eye, and my left foot was gone. My left thumb was off, and I was very badly burnt from the waist down, and numerous other injuries as well. And he managed to keep me alive, and this team eventually found me. I had a big piece of shrapnel in my neck, the size of a matchbox, and they couldn't remove it because it was too close to some of the arteries. And so the doctor didn't want me to drive out. The roads were too bad. And so this team of incredible people were trying to find a way for me to leave. And amazingly, someone knew someone in the Polish intelligence who let them know that the Slovenian prime minister, the Polish prime minister, were on their first visit to see Zelensky since the war started, and that if we could break through the curfew and get to the train, the Polish prime minister had agreed to evacuate me. And so we had this nighttime drive where every Ukrainian checkpoint thought that we were a Russian squad coming in. They were opening up all my wounds. They were checking out to see if we were genuine. And with minutes to spare, we finally got through to this Polish prime minister's train. And it was just the most, incredible story, but also they didn't have enough pain meds for me. And this was the point at which the pain started to kick in. And we had a 10-hour train ride out to Poland, during which I just found, I suppose, a new level of strength, an ability to control your mind, to tell yourself that you mustn't let the pain get too much of you. I had a traumatic brain injury, and I couldn't stop my mind just churning, twisting. And again, those 10 hours were some of the worst. I learned that Pierre and Sasha had been killed on that train, and I just had to keep going. Now, I knew that the US military and Secretary Austin had agreed to treat me, but they would not send American troops into Ukraine because government policy was we will not have troops in Ukraine. But if I could make it to Poland, then the US military had agreed to treat me. And it was this incredible moment where we crossed the border, and there was a Black Hawk from the 82nd Airborne waiting there for me. And I remember being taken off and stretchered into this Black Hawk helicopter. And I had this amazing sense that 70 plus years earlier, my father had been rescued as a young boy on the streets of Manila and pulled up behind a tank by a soldier from the Ohio National Guard. And American soldiers saved my dad's life around the world. And here was I, a generation later, as a proud American, being saved by American soldiers around the world again, some of whom veterans had come in to risk their lives. And I just felt this incredible sense of total pride, and so amazing that America will do that to come and save you. And it was just an incredible moment for me. And once I was in the hands of the US military, I was taken to Landstuhl, where so many of the injured soldiers went from Iraq and Afghanistan. I did 10 days there as they tried to keep me alive. And then I went to BAMC, the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. And I was there for the next 7 months. Again, they built me back up. They made me stronger than before. And I was surrounded by veterans who said, we've gone through it, you can get through it. And really, the second book, Resolute, is about my recovery from that point on.
Well, in the context of having been incredibly unlucky to have been hit the way you and your colleagues were, and two of them, of course, died, you were also, it sounds like, extremely lucky in what followed immediately thereafter, as you just recount. So what a powerful combination that is. I do want to talk about your recovery in a moment, but one of the things that I found so striking is that ever the journalist, even with life-threatening injuries, you felt the need to get the story, to document your personal situation by taking photos with your phone, notwithstanding your missing leg and your mangled foot. So what was that urge to do to do that, as you write, what you call that, notwithstanding the primal survival instinct. Tell us what's in the mind of a journalist such as you,
Yeah, it's
notwithstanding that
amazing. I
physical
suppose
pain.
after many years covering conflict, it was a safe place for me. That's just what I did when things were bad. You reported, you covered. And, when I was lying there are times at which I got out my phone, couldn't make phone calls. And so I remember took a couple of pictures of my leg and I thought, well, I'll document that, whatever my mind was thinking. Then I would delete them because I was thinking if I died, I don't want to be uploaded to the cloud and for my kids, my wife to see these pictures. Though I never really thought that I was going to die. I never thought this is over. I always thought I'll get through it. But then straight away, you know, even from the next few days, I knew I wanted to report it. I knew I wanted to write about it. And I started taking notes about how I was feeling, about what I was going through. And I guess it's just built into journalists, to be honest. And that's just what I continued doing throughout my whole stay in hospital. And being in hospital is also it's very boring when you're in the ICU and your legs are gone. So you're just lying there and your muscles have atrophied, but you can work, you can write, you can take things down. I think that was a great part of therapy in a sense for me. It was keep working, keep writing, and don't keep anything inside. I'd spoken to enough veterans who had been injured, who didn't want to talk about it, who kept it inside, and that leads to dangerous places. So I told myself early on, I'm going to write everything. I'm going to tell anyone if I'm having a tricky day. I'll tell the first person who comes in my hospital door if it's a bad day. And it was the first time I'd done that in my life. And boy, did I find that helped. And all of that is what really led to the first book.
Well, and you thought you were told at least that you were going to be in hospital for 2 years, right? So, and the book references evolving from a battle of survival to a battle of will. So tell us more about that will. And how long were you actually in the hospital, and what was that journey like, especially as you just referenced the prospect of great boredom coupled with pain?
Yeah, there are two ways of in which people were telling my wife and I how it was best for me to recover. And she spoke to the wives of other veterans who had been injured like I'd been injured. And half of them said to her, you've all got to go and you got to be by his bedside, in Texas with the kids, because that's going to help him recover. You got to be with him. And the other half said, no, you should stay at home, let him recover. You don't want to uplift your family and take them over there. So you keep the family together. Now, everyone has their own way of recovering, and each side works for depending on who you are. But my wife and I made the decision that my wife and children would just stay in London, and I would do everything I could to get back to them. I didn't want to disrupt their lives anymore. I wanted their lives to continue to be as normal as it could be. And that's just the decision we made. But it gave me that willpower to say, okay, but if I'm here by myself, I am going to spend every single day doing something that I didn't do the day before. I'm going to find something every single day a goal to achieve. If I took 3 steps, and this is once I started to walk, learning to walk, if I take 3 steps one day, I will take 4 the next. And I'm sure my physio has probably got a bit annoyed at me towards the end, because I was constantly ringing the bell saying, what can we do? How can we push this? What more can we do? And I think you need that to recover. You really do. And they told me stories of people who won't even get out of their beds in hospital, who lose their identity, who lose their drive. They are the difficult ones to treat. But look, the recovery itself, I was in hospital in Texas for over 6 months, between 6 and 7 months. But the recovery itself continued once I got home as well. I still wasn't walking very far. I still had to focus on a whole lot of physio, and I continue to have operations to this day on skin grafts and in my eye as well. So, but it was getting home, and that was setting a goal. And I think that's important for anything you're going to go through. Set yourself a goal, and you just work towards it. Every single bit of energy you've got goes towards it.
So throughout our conversation, there's this theme of great will, this great inner strength that you have. Tell us more about that. What is it that you have? You argue in the book that everybody has the elements of that. So what exactly is that? Where is that coming from, and how do people harness it?
Yeah, it's interesting. My latest book, Resolute, is sort of trying to look at that. And one of the questions I had for every doctor who's treated me, I ask all of them, because I say to them, look, half the people who who have injuries like this come out the way I've come out, really optimistic, really hopeful, don't take life for granted, think that we've been given a second chance and you really live life even in a better way. But the other half really go in a bad way, and they lose their drive, their identity. And I ask all my doctors, what is it? Why do some people have that resilience, that push, and why do others not? And I suppose I was looking always for some more philosophical answer, but almost all of them said the same thing. They said those who come through this really in a positive way are the people who come from strong families, strong communities. It's that people who have family members or people to fight for and who will fight for them gives you that drive. And you look at people who come from broken homes, people who come from, sort of broken families, they are often almost have a pretty tough time in recovery. And I just think that, again, it's one of the lessons I speak about all the time now is that, this starts from when you are young. You teach children to work hard. You teach them a strong moral backbone. You teach them how to adapt when they can't get through different things. And I think all of those are really good ways in which you can try and build up this resilience. And I guess I was very lucky growing up that my parents always wanted to take me around the world. We never went to sit on a beach or do this or that. We always went off to the jungles or went to meet people in different countries. We always wanted to be trying and meeting and exploring. And that's part of it too, be willing to try and explore and don't be afraid of going new places and doing new things. And so it's a difficult question that you ask because there are so many different factors that play into what makes someone resilient, what gives them willpower. But family, community, hard work, morals, those are the things that really count.
Well, you bring up your family often in Resolute, your wife, Alicia, and now your four daughters. You write, my magic, it turns out, is my family. And that was a very beautiful and powerful, at least for me, a way for you to capture it. How did Alicia handle this? Because I mean, it must have been, for anyone in that situation, completely devastating, nerve-wracking, all of that. But did she also have that inner strength that you reference, and just, obviously to the extent you're happy to share, what can we learn from her piece of this as the spouse of a survivor of such a terrible incident?
She had probably more strength than I did, really. So many people they always talk about me. What did I go through? My injuries. But the family goes through just as much. The family's life is totally turned on its head. Overnight, these things happen. And, from the minute this happened, and from the minute I first spoke to Alicia, when I was on that brutal train ride on the way out, I called her. And
Is that how she found out that what had happened to you? Or
no, she had been speaking. Fox had spoken to her straight away, and they had to decide if it was the right decision to move me. I couldn't really talk or respond at that point, but so she had to give the all clear to evacuate me, even though there are a lot of dangers in doing so. She said, Ben would want to be moving. He would want to get moving. Let's take him out. But not for a single second did she ever say, what has happened to us? This is terrible. Or how are we going to get through it? It was straight away, no problem. Whatever we've got to do, we will do it. I will keep working every minute and we won't complain. We will find a way through. And the strength that she had gave me immense amount of strength because I didn't have to worry. I knew that at home, the children were being taken care of, that Alicia was overseeing them, as well as trying to look after me from afar. But it was that strength in her that allowed me to say, right, now I will give everything I've got to get better every single day. I will fight because she's fighting over there. What has been really interesting, and I write this in Resolute as well, is when I got home, I thought that was the hard part over. I always thought that being in hospital, learning to walk, getting the skin grafts, all these operations, that was a tough part. But actually, and this really surprised me, the tough part came when I got home. When you take away the doctors and the nurses and the physios and the 24-hour care, and you take your injuries back home and you realize that there are many things that you can't do, that the way that you move around, the way that you can play with your kids, your schedule, all those are different. Alicia having to do things at home that I would have done before. And a prime example of this, and again, I write this in the book, is one night, our house was broken into. Two guys broke in at 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, our dog had started barking, and Alicia heard them downstairs. And I said, wait a moment. She said, no, I've got to get rid of them. I said, wait. And she didn't. She was heavily pregnant at the time. And I didn't have my legs on, and I was trying to get my legs on, but it was Alicia who went downstairs, had something brandishing in her hand and screamed and shouted at them and chased these burglars away. But what a reversal of roles. I hadn't appreciated before that I was the one that protected our family. I was the one that protected our house. That's what I always did. That's my role. And there she was doing that, picking up this incredible role because I couldn't do it in that moment. And it was like a few minutes later when I'd strapped my legs on and got up and managed to come downstairs, they'd already gone. And that was my wife. She is just the most incredible woman. But that was tough for a little bit after that. I suddenly thought, oh, that's something that I always did. I was supposed to do that. And on that occasion, I couldn't. But she is a remarkable, remarkable woman. And there hasn't been a single second where she has said our lives have are worse or have been hurt in a bad way. Not for a second. This is who we are. This is our life. And that's, we're still here. What a great blessing is what we say more often.
Yeah, it's a tremendous element of this huge story. Uh, Switching gears just a little bit, you were raised Catholic. What role did your faith play or is playing in your recovery? You described your relationship with God as an ongoing conversation back and forth. What's that conversation with God like now?
Yeah, it's also something that I really wanted to think about when I wrote this book, because the guy was educated at a monastery, mass 5 times a week, prayers twice a day, benediction twice a week. It ran my life. It was what I lived for into my 20s. And then I started covering conflict and I started to sort of move away from faith. I wasn't certain the role faith played, or if I needed to be part of an established religion, or I could rely on just sort of a moral backbone. Or I just started asking questions about it. I think many people in their lives, in their faith, I think it's good to ask questions. It's good to think about it. But and there are times when I became quite very religious again, and then I'd move away from it. So it was a real journey for me, backwards and forwards. But again, when during the attack, I was on the ground and I thought about Alicia. I thought about getting home to the children, and I'd spoken to Pierre. And then I spoke to God, and I asked God to please, God, get me home. Please, God, get me home. And there's the old saying, there's no atheist in a foxhole. But certainly when almost everything was gone, when I was lying there, and at that point had no idea how I was going to be saved, if I was going to be saved, if I was going to survive, you reach back to God. And that moment of where I stopped to just talk to him and ask him to please get me home, started to rebuild my faith. And then when I was in hospital as well, I started talking to the chaplains at the Brook Army Medical Center. And I had all these questions about, first of all, some people say, why would God allow this to happen to me? Why do I have these injuries? Why would God allow me to be so injured? But I never got to that place. That's never the direction I went. In the end, I just started to think, God has given me a second chance. He's made me so more appreciative of life, and I better not waste a second of it. Pierre and Sasha are dead. Incredible people. They're dead. And the last thing that they would want is for me not to go and do as much good as I can, to keep working as much as I can, to keep passing on the blessings that I've been given. And that's how I see my relationship with God, to be honest now, is I must
Do you
use
feel
that.
a sense of responsibility? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you were saved and others weren't saved, a sense of responsibility to do the most with whatever time you have going forward?
Yeah, I don't feel I don't have sort of a sense of survivor's guilt. And, I'm constantly sort of always watching out to see if I feel that, if that's the case. But, I know that we all knew the story we were telling. I'd worked with Pierre for 10 years in conflict zones around the world, and we knew exactly why it was important that we were telling these stories. And so I've never felt survivor's guilt. But I mean, Pierre did save my life that day. He got out of the car before I did. And that door was open because he had gotten out of the car. And I was in the middle seat, the death seat in the back row, and somehow was the only survivor. So I owe Pierre my life. And so I do feel responsibility to make sure that I live the rest of my life, in his name and in Sasha's name, trying to do the best I can. So there's a responsibility to make sure I don't waste it. Absolutely. But I don't feel responsible for what happened that day. The Russians were surrounding a civilian village, and they targeted a civilian car. And I think that's how I see what happened that day.
To round out the broad concept of people who were supportive to you, you mentioned community. You mentioned in the book, of course, the medical team that was so integral to your recovery. Uh, Tell us maybe a little bit more about the different elements of community, which you've spoken about now in our time together. And then specifically, what was the role that Fox played in getting you out, which was obviously significant. But I'm just curious if you could round out the concept of all the community that contributed to your post attack success.
Well, I'm incredibly lucky that I work for a network, and specifically that I work for Fox. They were immediately doing whatever they had to do to find our team, to see if we were okay, and then find a way of evacuating me when they found out that I was still alive. Um, I've been in conflict zones where freelance journalists have been injured, who have been alongside us, and they they don't get out. There's no one behind them, and so I'm immensely lucky. Fox is such a family. We've always been incredibly close, and they were there when I needed it. No questions. Whatever we've got to do, let's go in and find them. And of course, I'm incredibly lucky that Fox has a relationship, as does any network, with the Pentagon and with the government. And it was Jen Griffin, who was our Pentagon correspondent, who was actually with John Kirby, the spokesman of the Pentagon at the time, when she found out, and she said, "Can you help? Can you speak to Secretary Austin?" And I was the State Department correspondent at the time, so Secretary Blinken was also involved at the time, and he was trying to help as much. And that just gave us so many opportunities. And it was because of that that I was able to be treated by the US military, because of those doors being opened for me. And with the injuries like I've had, you know, it's almost impossible to be treated in the private sector, to be honest, because you have to go to a different hospital for every single injury. A burn for hospital for burns, hospital for your eyes, hospital for your prosthetics, hospital for your hands, and the idea of having to do that would have been almost impossible. But the military, very sadly, has a couple of incredible centers set up because of those injured in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I went to the Center for the Intrepid in San Antonio, and it's polytraumatic injuries. You often have all the same kind of injuries when you were blown up, and these centers do it all together. Every doctor working, side by side together. And that made such a difference. So that community was amazing because, first of all, in Landstuhl, I was pushed into the hospital, and they just kept saying, "We've got you now. We know how to get you through this. We've seen this before." And then they started bringing other veterans who'd been injured just like I'd been injured. And they were at my bedside every day saying, "Look at me. You'll be up and walking again. You'll get through anything. We've done it." That community, that gave me so much strength and so much will to be seeing other people, to be doing it alongside other people as well. I was so lucky to be a part of that community, to be allowed into it, without a doubt, it helped me in so many ways.
You write that 614 days after the attack, you went back to Ukraine to interview President Zelensky. He presented you with a medal, Ukraine's Order of Merit, third class. So not only for you, but for all of the hundreds of journalists who risk their lives every day to cover the war in Ukraine and everywhere else around the world. So tell us about that interview. How did it go? And why was it so meaningful to you?
Very early on, I knew I had to go back to Ukraine. More than anything, I believe that if you are, it's an age-old saying, but if you're knocked down, you got to get back up. That you mustn't be afraid of what's happened to you. And I wanted to go back, and I wanted to face up to what had happened. I wanted to look it in the eyes. And I spoke to Alicia about it for a while, and of course, she at first wasn't so certain herself if I should be going back, but she knew why it was important to me. And it was important for a number of different reasons. First of all, I wanted to almost relive it. And I went back in on the same kind of train that I was evacuated on. And I lay down in the same place, in the same similar cabin for those 10 hours. And I just tried to go back and think about every moment again. And I just wanted to go through that again so that I never felt I was hiding from it. And when we pulled into Kyiv the next morning after this overnight train, and I got off, I took my steps off that train, I felt this amazing sense that nothing was going to stop me, that I was going to find a way through any hurdles that came my way. And I also had this sense that the Russians had tried to silence journalists that day, that they tried to attack and stop us reporting, but they would never be able to do that. that no matter how hard journalism was attacked and struck, we would always keep reporting. You can't silence the truth. You can't silence journalism. And that was a key message that I wanted to go back to Ukraine, that I wanted to keep reporting, and that I wanted to speak to President Zelensky as well. So I had all of these different thoughts in my mind, and it was a pretty emotional trip back. I met the doctor who had treated me as well, and he was there. And I remember walking in to see him, and he started crying when I saw him, and he said it's absolute miracle. He couldn't believe that I was still alive with the level of injuries I had. He couldn't believe it. And I agree with him. Like as I've explained, I think so many things happened at the right time to evacuate me, to keep me alive, that I was saved to some degree. And I told him that I would never stop talking about, Ukraine and what's going on there and keep reporting on it. So it was a big, big trip back to me. And on another political side, fascinating to speak to President Zelensky. Of course, he's been in the news an awful lot at the moment, but he was, he certainly understood what the importance of journalists. He understood the role we were doing, and I think he sent a very clear message to all journalists that he appreciates that they can be out there risking their lives to tell the truth.
Well, as we record this conversation, we're 3 years into Russia's war in Ukraine. So I'm curious what your analysis is of what the different players are doing and how that may or may not lead to a resolution of the war.
Yeah, well, I think that, I'm glad that we're seeing the beginning of some peace talks. I'm glad that we are seeing a move towards some kind of a ceasefire. I do think it's going to be a long journey and a long road. And I think at the moment, the Russians feel like they are and have the upper hand. Putin feels he is sort of victorious at the moment. Not only have they just kicked all the Ukrainians out of Russia and out of the Kursk region, but he's quite aware that with President Trump, for a small amount of period, holding back intelligence and weapons from Ukraine, that perhaps that gives Russia even more ability to push back. That being said, we have been at a stalemate for such a long time. And I think that when you come to negotiations like this, you have to do what you can to get both sides to the table. And that is positive. So we'll see how this plays out. And I don't want to speak in too much detail because we just don't know. But I think that the priority has to be a long-term security guarantee. I think Putin is not going to be happy if he just keeps the land that he's currently captured. So as the Europeans are saying, and the Secretary of State Rubio said, can you make Ukraine a porcupine state? If you do find a line in which you can, for the moment, divide Ukraine along the where they're fighting, can you then arm Ukraine up? Can you give it security guarantees so Putin doesn't just try again in 3 years? So I think the Russians are almost impossible to negotiate with. I think they're very difficult. They like to, effectively, during negotiations, they like to put boulders right in the middle, and then they have you negotiate to remove the boulders that they just put there. So you end up negotiating to get rid of things that they just keep adding on. It's very difficult. They've done this throughout their entire history. You go back to Soviet eras as well. They are negotiating masters, and it's very difficult. But I think the only thing that could push them back is more. I would say that Ukraine needs to be supported more in the short term. I think that you need to say, unless you come to a peace deal and a ceasefire, then there will be consequences. There will be more sanctions. There will be more, intelligence going to Ukraine. But we're at the early stages right now, and I'm still optimistic that we can reach some ceasefire, because I think that has to happen. But I think it'll take longer than we think it will.
As a highly experienced journalist who's also deeply familiar with Ukraine, how do you assess the state of international coverage of what is happening in Ukraine? Is this full story getting out? Any thoughts on how we're doing three years into this war?
Well, certainly a lot less coverage of it at the moment. And I remember speaking to President Zelensky. It was just soon after September. Soon after Hamas attacked Israel, and October, and he said he understood that the eyes of the world are moving away from Ukraine to a certain degree. He understood that the focus was now moving towards the Middle East, and I think that's still to some degrees true. But I think one of the most difficult issues right now is balancing all the new reporters and the social media and the stories that you get there versus really established networks and papers. And I think more than ever, it is essential to make sure you're getting your news from the really established networks and established papers, because we are getting countless reports that are not so true on social media. It's hard to know what's going on. So I know people were saying, should formal established religion reporting, is it disappearing? And I would say no, it should be getting stronger right now, because you have to absolutely trust the people who are doing the coverage. So I think that the networks are doing a pretty good job. They're not out there as much as I think the Ukrainians would like them to be out there, but it's ongoing.
Well, and as is pointed out, you're not alone in terms of the injury or the death of journalists covering war zones, right? So that is a built-in obstacle to getting the story out. Maybe a word, if you would, about journalists facing danger and how that affects the ability of news organizations to cover these incredibly important stories.
I think that sort of every network I know, and we have quite a tight group of correspondents who cover conflict. We all know each other. We see each other in the same places, and we always talk about it. Have nothing but incredible support from the teams who are sending us there. We understand the importance of the story, and we always go everywhere, looking as much into the security arrangements, looking into where you're going to go, talking about the stories you're going to be telling. So look, you've got to make sure that you are doing it in the right possible way, but every network still understands that you've got to be there to tell the story. You cannot tell these stories from far off. You can't. You have to go and you have to look people in the eye. You have to smell the area. You have to talk to a variety of people from across the political spectrum. And that's what makes it essential to be out there. There's no other way of telling a story without being on the ground. And almost every time I have a story that I'm going to tell, my whole career, you have an idea in your head of what the story is or what the angles will be. And every time you get there, there's something you didn't anticipate. There's an angle you didn't see. And that doesn't happen until you are there on the ground doing the work in person.
Well, switching gears a little bit, I'm privileged to be sitting in President Reagan's office here at the Reagan Library. He was a man of character who was, of course, nearly assassinated. You and he share a powerful will to survive and to go back to work following a near-death experience. Can you draw any parallels between President Reagan's story and your journey, or those of others who have overcome tremendous physical adversity? You were born in the Reagan era, but I'm curious if you have any reflections on President Reagan.
Well, I mean, incredible willpower. I mean, and particularly on the global, scale. I mean, he was remarkable in trying to get countries to the table, but being really firm and forceful about where he stood and where the US stood. And I think that strength, even in difficult times, is essential. You have to find a real balance of both being strong and firm about what you want to achieve, but also being able to stand up when you've been knocked down. And Reagan did that time and time again. Incredibly strong character. And I just think that the same is true, I'd say with quite a few journalists I've met who have been injured have managed to find the same strength to go back. And I just think that it suggests that you really care about what you're doing, that it means so much to you, that you understand that there may be, that even if things go wrong, you want to keep doing it. And that's what makes a great leader. If you want a real sign that someone is just going to keep caring and keep coming back, it's when they do so after they've been knocked down. And I think we all know that Reagan was incredibly strong in that sense. And like to this day, he still leaves a mark on geopolitics and his foreign policy.
Returning to one of the core themes of the book, look, you continue to overcome adversity. Your guidance to anyone facing a fearsome challenge that they aren't sure they can overcome is, quote, trust that you have what it takes to battle against any adversity. Trust that the power of resilience is already inside you, waiting to be deployed, unquote. So how can people deploy that inner strength despite them not necessarily knowing that they have that strength? And how long and how much work did it take on your part to realize you had this inner strength, or was it just there all the time?
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. Actually, I think knowing that you've got that resilience, that trust, is the most incredible strength you can ever find. And I now know that I can get through all the worst, and I always used to ask myself, when I saw people badly injured in conflict zones, I'd always ask myself, what would it be like? How would I react if that happened to me? How would I be if I was the guy on the gurney? And you don't know. You've actually no idea. And I hope no one ever has to learn that. I really don't. But I'm very proud of how I handled it. And I have now learned that that resilience is inside me. It came out when I needed it. And knowing that, having the trust that I can get through anything, is immensely strong. And being resilient doesn't just mean that you get through difficult things and they feel easy. No, being resilient means that you go through difficult moments if they come up and they are still difficult. But you know that if you find a way through them, if you work hard and you set goals, it will be fine on the other side. So there's never this idea that we all live in a world where everything's great and it's all easy. But being resilient is an understanding that even when things aren't great and easy, that you know you will get to the other side of them, and that drives you on. And I talk about trust in your resilience, and then I also talk about adapting. I think that big part of resilience is learning how to adapt. There are time and time again, there were times when I couldn't figure something out, and I just learned to adapt. If I can't figure that out, I will do it a different way. If I can't move in this way, let's try another direction. If I can't drive that car, let's find a different way of doing it. Countless things. Adapt. Adapting gets you through the most difficult scenarios. Look for alternatives. Reach out, speak to people. Never keep it silent. Always talk about issues. And lastly, so I talked about trust in your resilience, then adapt, and then embrace it. Challenges, if you see a challenge as this terrible disaster coming your way and you are afraid of it, it's going to be almost impossible to get through it. But if you see a challenge coming your way and you say, all right, what a great opportunity is this? How much will I learn from this? How will I become a different, better person afterwards? You can thrive on that. And there are times, time and time again, where, in some difficult moments, there'll be some points where I'd say, pretty painful moments as well. I'd say, I'm not sure I can handle any. And then I'd stop myself and say, you got this. Yes, you can. And more than that, bring it on. What else have you got? I will smash that wall down as well. Come on. And, you can do remarkable things when you put your mind to it. When I was on the train ride out for 10 hours, there were times like that as well. And when I felt the pain couldn't be any worse, I would tell myself to find another level. You've got another level, find it. And that pain would come down. You could use the power of your mind to control some of that pain. And I just think that our minds are absolutely remarkable. And you just have to be focused. It doesn't come easily. You've got to work hard to control things. You've got to work hard to find a way through it. If you just think it's going to happen naturally, that's not going to happen easily. But if you work hard, you focus on it, you trust it, you adapt, you embrace, you'll get through absolutely anything.
Did you ever compare your injuries and suffering to those of others and say, and let me put it this way, if somebody's going through a very difficult time right now, should they say to themselves, well, if Ben Hall can lose a leg, part of a foot, lose his eye, whatever problem I have, I can overcome it too, especially as inspired by his words? Or is comparison, was that a helpful instrument for you? Or should people, is that one element of how people should draw strength from your story?
Yeah, I think it should, but I don't think that you need to be injured the way I've been injured to have to tap into resilience. Look,
Right.
Whether it is financial problems, whether it's family issues, whether it's anxiety, all these sorts of things, you still have to stop, evaluate where you are, what's going on, and try to figure out where you want to get to. And just tell yourself that you can find a way through them. Be proactive. Don't hide from them, and you will find a way through them. And so I hope that some people will look at my story and say, however he found a way to get through that, we can use the same sort of techniques and same methods perhaps to find our way through whatever we're going through. And so it's one of the reasons I wrote Resolute, the book, is I hope that I can pass that on to other people. And people passed it to me. People told me how they got through it, and that inspired me. And if there's a small thing I can do, it's try and pass that on to other people and maybe inspire them as well.
Well, Ben, our time is drawing close to a close, but is there anything else you'd like to share about the book, about your family, about your journey with our audience?
I mean, I talk in the book pretty openly about some of the harder points and some of the really difficult times, because I think it's right to do that, and I think that should help people. I talk about the flashbacks that I have. I talk about some moments where I just felt pretty broken, and I just think that it's okay to talk about those moments, and I'd encourage everyone to do that. If things aren't going well, just be clear, go talk to someone, let them know, and even just a few words really, really helps. And so I totally encourage people doing that. I mean, it can absolutely change you. So that's what I would encourage people to go do. And Just be grateful, enjoy moments. As bad as some things were, sometimes I would find just a couple minutes of joy in between operations. I'd look at whether it's a beautiful piece of music or whether it's just a beautiful bird that would sometimes land on my hospital window. Enjoy that for a little minute and then get back to work, but don't get too caught up in things. You got to just enjoy what's there. So there've got so many lessons that I have in the book, and I hope people enjoy it, and I hope that they can learn from it.
And Ben, on a personal level, today we're having this conversation. I'm in Simi Valley. You're in Fox's New York City headquarters. Where are you living? Kind of what's your setup in terms of geographically? And you're a U.S. and a British citizen, correct?
Yeah, I'm a dual citizen. I sort of grew up between the two. I'm in the UK. I'm based in London at the moment, but a lot of my work now is US based, and so I'm doing a series at the moment called American Exceptionalism, and we are going around the US and we're looking at communities that have been broken, knocked down, but rebuilt themselves, and that's something I'll be working on this year.
And that's available on Fox Nation, correct?
That's available on Fox Nation, exactly. Yeah, so it's those stories of resilience that I find just so fascinating. I want to keep telling. And day to day, I'm just still covering the news. I'm reporting on Ukraine, reporting on what's happening in the Middle East, and that is just sort of the work and the bread and butter of my job that I love. And so trying to do it all.
Well, Ben, and to our whole audience, the book is Resolute: How We Humans Keep Finding Ways to Beat the Toughest Odds. The book is available wherever books are sold, including at reaganfoundation.org/store. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we wish you well and look forward to being in touch.
It's a great pleasure to speak to you, David, and I hope to come and visit you in person there one day soon.
We would love to host you. So good luck, and we'll look forward to being in touch. And thanks again.
Okay, thanks, David.
Thank you for joining us for today's virtual programming event. We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
Let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.